to move on to the next one. So this is again one of the things that I'm really super excited about. And so we talked about decentralized applications, and we've kind of talked about what it means to have information on the blockchain. But what about yourself? What about your identity? And what about how you interact with other people online? What if that could be automatic? What if that could be your entire self represented somehow on the blockchain? And so to talk more about that, I am very happy to welcome onto the stage uPort product leader at ConsenSys, Michael Sena, as well as CEO at Bitmark, Sean Moss-Pultz. Thank you. Come on up, guys. Great. So yeah, good. Let's move the chair over here, maybe. We're a bit ghetto. So I mean, I've got a lot of different questions. Actually, let's switch. Okay. So this is an area that I find to be again absolutely fascinating. Just choose one.
I'm gonna dual mic this thing.
So it's super fascinating. But before we really kind of get into it. Let's just, I mean, Michael, you gave a keynote, but I think we might have some new people in the audience. So just give us a quick intro of who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, sure. My name's Michael Sena. I'm co-founder and head of product at uPort, a self-sovereign identity platform being built on Ethereum. And I was an early employee at ConsenSys.
And Sean, what about you? Who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, so my name is Sean Moss-Pultz. I started a company that is trying to reclaim ownership for individuals. So our data, we believe, is our most valuable asset. And there needs to be a system like there is for recording land, like there is for recording knowledge, like patents and trademarks and copyright. We need a system for data.
Great. Okay, great. So I think that one of the coolest applications of blockchain is this ability to replicate the offline world online. And to have it so that there is like an indelible record of who you are, what you do, but it's also secure and it's private. So to start the conversation, I kind of want to give you guys the idea that I have in my head, and I want you guys to tell me, how much of it is right, how much of it is wrong, and we'll go from there. So basically, like the way that I kind of see it is it's almost with artificial intelligence powered by blockchain. In 20 years' time, we can have an almost identical copy of myself, my personality, my preferences, the things that I like to buy, past transactions. Any data that exists now could be on the blockchain where there could actually be like an avatar of myself. And so it's a copy of myself that exists online through the blockchain, through artificial intelligence and smart contracts that can automatically interact with other personal avatars, with the avatars of a company or of an organization. And that avatar would be authorized to make certain decisions about myself. And so, for example, like right now, if I use Google, if I use any online service, automatically I'm giving up my personal data, just as the price of entry. But with this blockchain avatar, maybe that I would have already set a preference. So depending on what data a company needs, I'll say, okay, I'm only going to sell them that data for 5 cents. That's the lowest I'm going to go, or something like that. Let's say that some medical institution needs to do some research, and I can authorize them automatically. I've already said that someone, if they want to know, they can access my blood type, but that's the only information that I'm going to give them. And again, all of this is automatic. It's happening in real time. I'm able to make money off of micropayments just by all of these things. And so, like I said, so how much of that is right? How much of that is wrong? And how far away do you think we are from that?
Go ahead, you start it.
Sure. I think it's a good vision. I think there are many things that we would need to solve in order to fulfill that vision. But I think largely the one of individuals being able to register a unique identifier or a set of identifiers that can collect attributes and reputation score, like reputational elements, granular bits of data addressed to that identifier, which in my opinion should probably live off-chain. And that can be granularly disclosed and negotiated for on my behalf, which is sort of what I call a data agent. And data agents can be given various permissions through intelligent key management and derivation and sort of hierarchical permissions on keys. I think that's a system that we're all building towards and that people are working to solve some of those challenges today.
Okay, yeah, so the way I like to think about this is that anyone that's ever made money with money knows how much easier that is than making money with muscle, right? And anything that we can do as a society that can let more people make money with money, more people make money when they're sleeping. So this is known as leverage, the better society as a whole can be. And so what I'm most interested in is this idea of that if data is the new oil of the economy, then how does an individual own some of that? And how do you democratize the tools of ownership the same way the previous, say, 20, 30 years democratized the tools of publishing, of creative works, right? Ownership is still something that corporations have, that people, maybe if you have a lot of lawyers, you can get at. So if we can move to a world where there is this agent, I like that name, agent too, but there are these people that are making money for you while you're sleeping, while you're walking around, maybe even when you're in your mother's womb, you're already making money. I think this is a fantastic vision of the future.
But but how long is it going to take to get there? I mean, like, I think that one of the things that I've learned from today is that, you know, just how much of an infancy blockchain really is. I mean, one of the biggest issues, you know, is scalability. And before today, I didn't realize that's how big of an issue scalability is. So looking at, you know, this possibility of creating these agents, I mean, how far away do you think we actually are, and what kind of pieces do we need to make sure that they can actually come to life?
Sure. So I take perhaps a different view of blockchain. I don't believe everything needs to be blockchain. I don't believe everything needs to be decentralized. I think there's a balance between these two. And I think right now we can already begin to flip the system to where you can have open exchange of value, and you can decentralize some of the pieces. So these agents that perhaps could live off blockchain, that could be storing fingerprints, if you will, of their transactions on blockchain. You could do that today. There's no waiting for that. You don't need to wait for that. And over time, we can create more trust, more transparency into that system. And that's really the promise of blockchain, is that ability to create trust in environments where we don't trust one another.
So before you answer the question,
Yeah.
Michael, Michael, both you and Sean have mentioned this on-chain, off-chain.
Yes.
So Michael, can you just explain that really quickly? What exactly does that mean?
Sure. Yeah. So in digital identity and blockchain digital identity in particular, there's this ongoing debate between what lives on chain, so what lives on the Ethereum blockchain, what data is stored there, what's actually being registered, versus what's off chain. And so, in the context of sort of, I think what we're discussing here, I'm proposing that the identifiers live on chain, and you use the public blockchain network as an open registry for keys and identities, and also makes a great place to issue revocations, because that way you eliminate the double spend problem of keys. But sort of the associated data to that identifier could live wherever. And the most secure, or I guess the most private manner that it can be handled today is off-chain.
Okay, and so then to get back to the original question then, I mean, how far away do you think we are from, or what problems do we need to solve in order to get to where we can actually do that?
Yeah, I think many of the technical problems are solvable in order that we're taking to get there. I think what needs to happen is some industry standardization around best practices, some things like a naming system, like what is DNS for blockchain identifiers, like what does that look like? If some identifiers are registered on the public Ethereum network and some are registered on the public Bitcoin network and some are registered on other identity-specific chains such as Sovereign, how do you resolve these identifiers is a big challenge. So resolution and lookup. There's also things like where are these data agents hosted? If basically it's a Docker for identity that you can store granular bits of data in and logic can be run and prices negotiated autonomously. Who hosts that and how do you maintain self-sovereignty over a system where unless every single person is plugging in a server in their house to store their personal data, then you're still relinquishing some amount of control to a centralized party. I think those are the things that have to be solved, not necessarily like, can we build the system?
Yeah, I'd like to add one thing. So I also agree that I think the technical problems are not really the problems. There's this whole notion of consent that most people don't talk about, but this is actually what governments and institutions care about the most is just because you have somebody's data, unless you're Facebook, you can't just use it. You need consent to use it. There's a great example of Google wanting to get access to medical records in the UK, and they went and started running their AI algorithms on the medical records, and the courts shut them down and said, you don't have rights to access that data. And so I think that how do you live in a world where individuals can be granting consent, and how do you record the consent? How do you deal with the consent? The protection of data actually is a far more nuanced problem than putting it on the blockchain and letting individuals duke it out.
Yeah, and that's one of the big issues. You look at like Bitcoin and Ethereum, and they're designed to be decentralized. They're not designed to be anonymous. And so, while on the one hand, hey, that's really great, and people they have a certain level of privacy, but with Bitcoin, if you want to figure out who's making what transaction, with a bit of digging, you can do that. So there is this problem with privacy. So how do you say, like, how do you release some of your data, but not release other parts? How do you say, okay, I am this type of person, but not actually, saying I am who I am?
Yeah, there are many ways you can answer this. One of the best practices that we found is when issuing these signed statements to identities that sort of are verified claims or attributes about an identifier, the best practice is to issue them in as granular of a way as possible. So when I go to my bank and I click, connect my decentralized identity to the bank or collect my verifications from the bank isn't issuing me one verification with a lot of fields in it. It's basically issuing me a verification for each field in a way such that I can selectively disclose only parts of that to a counterparty who's requesting it.
Yeah, like what I would say is that this word privacy is actually really difficult, and perhaps a better word is protection. The Europeans talk more in terms of data protection than data privacy. And if you think about what privacy means, it means different things to different people. If you think about what protection means, it means you're going to be kept safe. And so data is different. Once you release data into the world, that's it. You're not going to get it back. You can't undo those bits being moved around. And so what you really need is some kind of frameworks to thinking about how this connects into the way governments try to protect citizens, the way we would expect our institutions protecting citizens, and then to be able to bring the individual transparency into how that data is being protected. Whereas right now it's not at all. You don't, especially if you're an American, you don't even have rights to ask the company what are they doing to your data. Whereas if you're an EU citizen, not only can you ask, but you can force the company to tell you where they got the data from, who are they giving it to. It's not perfect by any means, But I think there's a lot more work that needs to be done there because the physics, if you will, of this digital stuff is once it gets out, you can't bring it back.
But like I said, that's one of the big questions and we talked a little bit about it before, is adoption. So like it's like in the United States, a company is not legally required to disclose this information. So why would they want to adopt some type of blockchain-based identity solution?
You want to go ahead?
And sorry, was the question around end users or companies?
Companies. So about companies adopting this type of technology, because like in the U.S. right now, I mean, they can basically do whatever they want. And if you say, hey, tell me what you're doing, they say, no, we don't have to. So why would they want to adopt a transparent technology?
Yeah, I mean, and there are many different reasons for different companies, but I think ultimately some of the first movers in the space will be companies where maintaining this data is a liability, or we're maintaining other sorts of data about a user, whether those are users' private keys or users' other sorts of data, where that's actually a financial liability, so it makes sense to offload. But in some of the other situations where it's going to be more a top-down mandate, like with GDPR coming and that sort of regulation, like these sorts of identity systems where individuals control private keys and where consent is built into the exchange of data, they're sort of GDPR compliant by design. And so if not bottoms up, people choosing some of the tops down pressure will come from complying with regulation, I think.
Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I also think that there will be some industries where the people that can get there first can do really new business. So for example, if you were a pharmaceutical company and if you had a way to crowdsource data from individuals that actually complied with the regulation that you need, you can make better drugs. And there's a number of different industries that just can't go out there and just pillage people's data and use it without consent. And these industries, they want that data. They want to use that data. They want to pay for that data. They just have no mechanism right now that allows them to do it. So if that is made easier, I think there's a lot of interesting commerce, social benefit, nonprofit benefit, definitely commercial benefit too that's available.
Yeah, no, and it's also interesting because we're talking before about decentralized applications, and Bitcoin was almost an anarchist response to centralized, what they call centralized manipulation of the value of fiat currency. But then here we're hearing more about kind of this balance between government regulation and blockchain, which is in essence decentralized. And so how do you see that playing out? I mean, like where really does the government and regulation really fit into identity blockchain or just blockchain in general? Sean, why don't you take it?
You want me to stab it first? Okay. So yeah, this is a difficult question. People tend to be binary. Either you're an anarchist or you believe in big government. I see a role for government. I'm definitely not an anarchist. I believe that people deserve transparency, and I believe that people deserve protection and privacy, and governments should be transparent, and institutions should be transparent. And so this can shift the power back to the way it was for a long period of time. The ability to see everybody's financial history, everybody's financial transactions is really unique to the last, say, decade or so. And I think that technologies like Bitcoin, especially some of these new privacy-preserving technologies like what's going on in Zcash with snarks and these sorts of things, it will shatter this dream of ever being able to know everything, governments being able to know everything, and I think that's very healthy.
Yeah, agreed. I think I fall somewhere in the middle. I understand that for change to happen, in some way it requires being pragmatic about solutions, working with existing players, getting things in market and very specific use cases to begin to test. We're seeing that adoption from governments already in the US, they're talking about figuring out an alternative to social security numbers. And so like governments are moving towards some of these decentralized systems because if they don't, then they will be disrupted. But also I believe that, there could be systems that fundamentally change the way the contracts that governments have between themselves and their citizens and their participants. And so, yeah.
Yeah, no, and it's interesting because in some ways, decentralized applications, well, again, it's very nascent and in an infancy. It does have the ability to replace some governmental functions, and in particular in terms of information exchange and things like that. But I mean, like, so when we look out, 5, 10, 20 years, I mean, what do you think this is going to look like? I mean, what is my identity going to be like in that time?
It's going to get weird. I feel like because I'm on an identity and AI and data panel, we should mention biometrics on blockchain and everything else about every other buzzword you can throw in. But realistically, I think there will be a digital representation of myself and all of the things that you described earlier on in the panel. And this will be accessible cross-device, cross-platform, cross-touch point, and will in some senses follow me around where I go, and after I die, be able to represent the person that was me for some period of time. And so when you really think about history in the sense, you have full state of history from time. And so I think
this is always a big question too, right? So like, the idea of, we talked a lot about, we have talked a lot about, the issue of cloning and things like that, right? Where, but it's all assuming that clone might be a biological one. But I mean, the idea that somehow, your agent perhaps could live beyond your physical body is, I think you just blew my mind. But anyway, so yeah, so looking out into the future, I mean, what do you think it's going to look like?
So I can tell you about the things that I'm most excited that I see coming soon, right? And one of the things that always bothered me, so I'm an American, but I live in Asia, and whenever I want to send money back to the US, it's extremely expensive. And usually I want to send money for some kind of charitable cause, nonprofit, something like that. And when you send money to a nonprofit, you have no idea how the money's used, you have no idea is it actually getting to the people that you care about. And so I think probably the easiest, most influential way to start these decentralized autonomous organizations is to just do them for charity. And so you can imagine that there's a disaster somewhere, and instead of giving it to the Red Cross and they're going to use half of it for some of their executives to fly around in jets, you had a smart contract that distributed the funds, and every single spend was transparent to the donor. I think you wouldn't even need a jurisdiction to say, hey, where does that contract live? Because nobody cares. If you can see where your funds are going, if you can see who's using them, you're going to be happy. And I think that's going to be the training wheels, if you will, for people to actually understand what a corporation could be like if it lived outside, or let's say cross-jurisdiction, right? And so that's how I sort of see the inklings, if you will, of what this could become.
So it's basically like a blockchain-based one world government. Is that kind of?
I like it for specific purposes because I think that government is always hard to understand for people. It's always abstract, and to me, like being able to spend money and right away know that money is going to go towards helping some cause, and I can even see how it's helped and who spends it and what are they spending it for. To me, that is like the epitome of the power of the blockchains, of the transparency, of the trust that this can enable.
Right. Well, that's interesting. So kind of as a way to wrap it up.
Yeah.
We just went really big picture just there. Super interesting. But what I want to know is for your projects right now, what is the biggest problem that you're trying to solve in what you're trying to do? What's your biggest challenge right now, Michael?
Our biggest challenge is preserving privacy or pushing the privacy needle forward while building an identity system on Ethereum. At the core, what we do would be very simple if no one cared about privacy. But the privacy issue is the deep challenge that we need to solve through lots of key management and smart defaults for users and things.
And how long is it going to take to solve that?
I can't put a time on it, but the issue will be solved from many different approaches, both from protocol privacy preserving implementations and also from applications being able to better handle private keys.
Great, cool. All right, Sean, what about you?
Yeah, so I think we perhaps have kind of a similar problem in that the user experience of, okay, so we lived in this world where we could give our control to a central authority and trust the central authority could protect that asset, whatever it is. Maybe it's our data, maybe it's our health records, whatever that is. And now we're saying, hey, look, blockchain is the future, you can control your own stuff. And if you actually ask somebody, what does it mean to control their own stuff? Like, are you okay if you lose your Bitcoin, you can't go cry to anybody? Like, are you okay with that, right? And the answer is most people are not, right? And it's really, really, really radical what you have to do to protect those private keys right now. And so on a conceptual level, people, I think, agree with that. They like that balance. But what do you do? Like, do you centralize the keys and do you put yourself right back in the old architecture that doesn't work? Or do you decentralize the keys and you basically take the problem and you offload it to the individual and you say, hey, don't worry if the network gets hacked, I have no problem. If you get your keys stolen, that's your problem, your computer. You should keep your computer safe, right? So what do you do in these kind of environments? And how do you actually make a usable app for people to use right now where they can be in control of their keys? And I mean, I've been thinking about this now for 2 years and I can't find a good answer, right? And talking with as many people as I can about this. So I think the reality is that the protection of the private keys, this type of security is something that we really don't understand very well. This feeds into the data privacy, this feeds into the stuff he was talking about. You hear about people being able to correlate data. You release 2 data sets, well, 3 data sets, you can de-anonymize somebody. That is deadly scary. What do you do? Right? So these are the kind of things that really scare me, that I don't know how to solve.
Great. Well, that's great. It's good. It's glad to hear that. Glad to hear about your challenges.
Yeah.
And with that, I think we're going to end the panel. Thank you so much again. Let's give them a big round of applause.
Thank you all.
Well, thank you.